I'd never been to the Mirror Realm before, Miss Mortimer was telling me. I didn't expect it to be so dangerous, and I certainly didn't expect you to have to come in after me. We were sitting on the porch of a cottage, sipping lemonade. We'd arrived the night before, and after the Midwest suburbs I was used to, it felt like being inside of a fairy tale. The white walls were crisscrossed with timber beams that were wider than I was. The flagstone floor was worn smooth by ages of use. A fine layer of dust covered everything. I got the feeling that this place didn't belong to Miss Mortimer, but I kept my mouth shut about that. I was much more concerned with why we were on the run in the first place. The idea that there was things out there that even Miss Mortimer was afraid of chilled my blood. To be honest, I never wanted to be involved with any of this. It was my best friend, Matilda, who wanted to be a... Miss Mortimer paused. Who wanted to walk through walls and things like that. I wanted to be a kindergarten teacher. Can you believe that? So, why didn't you? I asked, leaning forward in the creaky porch swing. The things Matilda was studying kept getting darker and more dangerous. I warned her that she was getting in over her head, but she didn't listen. In the end, she wound up in a very bad place and couldn't find her way back. That's what I was doing on the other side of the mirror. I was trying to reach her. And are you going to keep trying? I think so. Although, there isn't really much hope for finding her now. It's a shame. If only the situation was reversed, I'm sure Matilda would have found me a long time ago. These things never came as natural to me as they did to her. Miss Mortimer smiled and sadly looked out over the overgrown garden. A jungle of hyacinths, morning glories, and blackberry bushes. She clapped her hands together. Now, let's get this place cleaned up. It was odd how Miss Mortimer knew exactly where to find the record player and jazz album she wanted to play in the abandoned cottage, but I kept my mouth shut about that too. We beat the dust out of the mattresses, scrubbed tiles, and chopped a path through the garden while Ryofuki's scenery played in the background. We didn't finish until late afternoon. I'm going into town to pick up some things we need, but there's a creek at the bottom of the hill that you might enjoy exploring. She didn't have to tell me twice. Tired and sweaty as I was, the thought of splashing around in cool water sounded heavenly. I barely heard her warning about ticks and leeches as I ran through the tall grass towards the sound of water. The creek was shallow and fast and cold. It barely covered my ankles in most places, but I was able to find a pool beside a huge boulder that was deep enough to swim in. I rinsed my filthy clothes and left them to dry in the sun while I floated. Leaves rustled in the breeze overhead. My toes grazed against mossy rocks. I felt freer than I ever had in my life. Who are you? I sat up with a splash and nearly swallowed a lungful of water. A barefoot boy about my age stood staring at me with a confused expression on his face, like a rock had just fallen out of the sky and hit him between the eyes. Where had he come from? I'm, Eddie. I made up a name on the spot. He had to think about it, John. He's lying. I spun around with a start. A gap-toothed girl with rough-cut blonde pigtails was perched on top of a rock behind me, so close that I could almost touch her. So what if he's lying? I'd rather hang out with a liar than have to stare at your ugly mug all day, Abigail. The boy who'd spoken was hanging dangerously by his knees from a tree branch right above me. I couldn't believe it. I hadn't heard them approach at all. Ted, by the way. The guy with the face is Joan, and the girl with no teeth is Abigail. I do so have teeth, Abigail shrieked. They're just growing in. Shh, keep your voice down. Joanne looked around fearfully. Seconds later, a shadow swooped by overhead. Might have just been a bird, but if it was the biggest bird I'd ever seen. The three of them stood still, watching, and didn't resume speaking until it was gone. Sorry if we startled you, Joanne offered a hand to help me out of the water. I'm just not used to seeing other kids down here. I took his hand, and also my clothes, which I quickly put on in the shadows behind the boulder. There's a big waterfall down the creek, Joanne went on. Want to see? We had so much fun together that I lost track of time. Before I knew it, the sun had set and the water had become icy cold. I gotta go, I stammered. See you guys around? Of course. Joanne replied. The confused look he had returned to his face. Where else would we be? One thing, though, Ted piped up. Don't tell anyone you saw us down here. If you do, there could be trouble. Big trouble, Abigail nodded solemnly. I nodded. I understood that. There would have been hell to pay if my parents had caught me sneaking down by the streets to Miss Mortimer's, or playing in some dirty creek. That's why when Miss Mortimer asked me how my day had been over dinner, I just told her that it was fine. The creek was pretty, and I checked myself for ticks and didn't find any. If the 3 odd children I'd met were dangerous, or important in any way, I was sure she would have told me. But did she even know about them? What was this place, really? What did it mean to Miss Mortimer? No matter how many different ways I asked, I could never get a straight answer. Looking back, those late spring days all seemed to blend together. Miss Mortimer would give me lessons or chores in the morning. In the afternoon, I was ordered outside to play while she carried on her search for Matilda. I wasn't sure what exactly that entailed, but it was dangerous enough that she wanted me far away from the cottage while she was doing it. So I went down to the creek to play with my new friends, Joanne, Abigail, and Ted. They welcomed me open-heartedly to their games and inside jokes, but as the days rolled on, I realized that there was a lot they weren't telling me. Why, for example, did they always wear the same clothes? Why did they know so little about current events in the world outside the woods? And most importantly, what were they so afraid of? My new friends went out of their way to avoid certain areas of the woods and certain times of day. If they heard a loud sound in the underbrush or a shadow passed over the sun, they abandoned their play and hid. Once, the 3 of them ducked behind a log to avoid a single deer. I thought they were being silly until I noticed how strangely the deer was acting. It walked purposefully through the ferns, moving its head from side to side, just like a person searching for something. Its eyes, too, were blue and oddly human. I shivered. Do you think it saw us? Abigail whispered after it as it passed. I don't think so, Ted shrugged, but there was doubt in his voice. You probably ought to go back early today, though, just to be safe. Where do you guys live, anyway? I asked. Over yonder. Joan gestured up the hill on the other side of the creek. There used to be 5 of us, but Livy and Taylor got caught. What do you mean, caught? I groaned, sick of all their secrecy. What's going on around here? A raven flapped up from its perch on a nearby tree, and we all jumped. We must be on our way, Joan frowned. Farewell. The 3 of them walked up the hill, shadowy figures backlit by a fiery orange and eerie sunset. The next afternoon, none of my friends were at the creek. I waited for almost an hour before heading up the hill in the rough direction that Joanne had indicated. A sense of dread had tightened in my chest, and I didn't notice how oddly quiet the woods had become. Finally, I burst out of the tree into a wide clearing. I looked around for a house, but all I found was an old cemetery. Had I gone the wrong way somehow? I climbed onto the mossy flagstone wall to get my bearings, and as I did, I chanced to look down at one of the skewed mossy gravestones. Joanne Manafee, 1866 to 1874. It was a coincidence. It had to be, but when I examined the other headstones, I found them all. Abigail Callahan, 1904 to 1910. Ted Powell, 1949 to 1956. Rest in peace. Psst, someone whispered. Ted was standing at the edge of the woods. I noticed with a chill that his bare feet left no footprints on the muddy ground. From his weird slang to his pompadour haircut and funny-looking jeans, it all made sense. I backed away. You're dead, I muttered. That doesn't matter now, he hissed. Oh, what, you think being dead makes you safe? You almost got caught in... Ted's eyes suddenly went wide with fear. Hide! A shadowy shape closed in behind him. I crouched, pressing myself against the graveyard wall. Through a gap in the flagstone, I watched a pale, long-fingered hand reach out of the gloom and wrap around Ted's neck. A horrible, raspy voice echoed through the silent woods. Gotcha! Hey there kids, it's me, MrCreepyPasta, and I want to tell you thank you so much for watching tonight's video if you're watching on YouTube. Thank you so much for listening to tonight's podcast if you're listening on Spotify, and thank you guys for doing that thing where you subscribe, where you hit the bell, where you hit like, or you leave a little comment at the bottom or wherever you can leave comments at. I don't know, I don't use Spotify that much. And finally, I want to give a huge thank you to everybody who supports me on Patreon. This past year has been rough. I've been gone for quite a while trying to get things organized for my own life, and Patreon subscribers, you guys who subscribe everywhere, this has kept me afloat in turbulent waters. So I want to give a very special thank you to Jordan Humble, Diana Kraus, Disciple, Strategy Wolf Emoji, SullyMan, Brandon Mendoza, Brimstonepandemonium, Caltuna, William Wellington, Scruffy the Janitor, Brenna Crow, LaQueda Canizales, Smiley the Psychotic, Djenna, Dante Kinkade, SimbasBloodyMojo, Mephistopheles, CursepoxPrimarch, M, Jesus Cornejo, Yarghoul, VerbalHorror, Amber Clark, J. Kearns, Mike, himbojerry, CrusaderChocobo, Corbin Dallas, Estebean, Seclude, Salty Surprise, Red Shadowcat, Turtleman, Cryolinian, Mr. Marcus Blitz, Dirt Diver 030, Voice of Sand, Psychomel, Melted Lake, Tali Sue, William King, Sashi Suzaku, Croconut 509, Stricken, Freddy Krueger, Hades Nephew, Acid System, Sky Harbor, Nico Kyle, The Ginger Bros, Aaron Stormcrow, Daniel Polson, and Corey Kenshin. I really appreciate your support, and I cannot thank you enough.